Hi, this is Judy Saalinger from Lasting Recovery, San Diego's premier outpatient alcohol and drug treatment center. And today we're talking about
So why is your tax dollar supporting these guys with these big guns to walk around this flower field? Right? It's because of this thing, right? That little guy. Next. So let's talk about opiates. And the first use was in 3400 BC, long time ago. Our species has been monkeying around with these chemicals for a long time. Opiates are not pain drugs. They're drugs that act on the brain. They have effects on mood. They have effects on anxiety. And they've been called the joy plant. Hippocrates, we take the oath with his name on it, prescribed opium, including for depression and anxiety. So let's get it out of our minds that the brain has like little compartments for pain over here. That's just not the way the brain works. Sir William Osler, I had a colleague who wrote and said his partner had a renal stone. When William Osler, who's like this paragon of doctors, had a stone and they gave him morphine, he proclaimed that this was, God's own medicine. It's good stuff if you've got a renal stone. Next slide. So this is from the NIDA, and the reality is that opiates act on many places in the brain and nervous system. We discovered that these affect the brain in 1973. That was 3 years after I was born. And there's 3 opiate receptors. Don't memorize them. But then your brain makes endogenous opiates. Anybody work out this morning? Oh, folks, okay. Okay. I'll be the representative. You release natural opiates. Everyone knows this, right? So this is part of the, now I don't want to sound like a member of normal, like your brain has these receptors. That makes it good. But the reality is Mother Nature wired our nervous system with opiate receptors all over. So they're in the brainstem that controls breathing. They can block pain messages, but then they have a lot to do with emotions. So opiates themselves are complex. Next slide. So an opiate is a natural derivative of the opium poppy. And these come out of the opium poppy, these 2 chemicals, morphine and codeine. And an opioid is anything that binds to these receptors in the brain. And we're going to look at receptors in a minute because receptors are important to understand what buprenorphine is and what it does and to talk about it with our patients and clients. So there are different kinds. You can take these molecules and tweak them a little bit, and then you get what's called semi-synthetic opiates. And heroin, which was supposed to rescue, right? That's where the name comes from. It was supposed to be the heroin for the opiate epidemic. So you tweak the molecule, and you get a semi-synthetic opiate. And then you can just make some up. You can go in a lab and go to get a Ph.D. and make up opiates. And there's all kinds of formulations. And narcotics are what you call these if you're in the DEA. Next. Okay. So here's this little sap that's caused our species so much difficulty. And so it's interesting to know that codeine, you can tweak codeine, and your body does this to get morphine. Thebaine naturally comes out of this sap, and thebaine is made into buprenorphine. And the names are up here, and I'm not going to go through them all. And then then we've made up some opiates, methadone and fentanyl, which we've probably heard of. This is not actually accurate buprenorphine. We've made those up. And then tramadol is kind of a weird animal that we won't spend too much time talking about. Next. Okay, so this slide is important. There are, and I don't want to bore people with pharmacology, but this is actually a critical part of understanding buprenorphine. You have receptors that can be turned on or turned off, blocked. So people have heard. People are proposing in the wake of Philip Seymour Hoffman's death that we put naloxone out in the community. That blocks the opiate receptor fully, saves somebody's life if they're in respiratory depression. Then you can turn the opiate receptor on and make people feel no pain, and et cetera. And then you can do what's called partial agonism. You turn it about 30% on, and you block it 70%. So it's kind of this gray area of pharmacology. Really important. That's a take-home about buprenorphine. It's a partial blocker. The other thing, drugs have different abilities to grab onto receptors. Some grab really hard, and some grab not so hard. And so if you take buprenorphine, for example, and heroin, and if buprenorphine grabs the receptor harder than heroin, buprenorphine wins. And you get the effects of that drug instead of the heroin. Next slide. So let's go ahead and flip through here. So this is a Rube Goldberg machine. And Rube Goldberg was this cartoonist who invented complex problems for complex solutions for simple problems. So if you've got an itchy back, you can spray water through, and then you get this So let's look at how did we get to this problem with opiate dependence in history. So let's go and just flip through, Ty, slowly. The internet. The internet has contributed to the opiate epidemic. You can Google, how do I get opiates in San Diego? And who do I go to? That doesn't take a whole lot of effort, right? Or I can Google, how do I get this and that from this and that doctor? Huge information source to anybody with fingers. We invented these complex drugs and delivery systems and put them out in the community. Next. Marketing. There's some sad slides that I'm not going to get into because I'm not going to bash pharma today. I could, but I'm not going to. Showing the rise in advertising for long-acting opiates and prescription and death. Okay, so marketing is played into this. Next. Medical ethos changes. We're going to talk about this. As physicians, we're scientists, theoretically, but we're also influenced by other forces. And about 10 or 11 years ago, people started talking to myself and all the other physicians and wagging their fingers and saying, you guys are mean and do the right thing, and changing the way we thought about pain. Our prescribing patterns changed dramatically. Well, guess what happens when your prescribing patterns change dramatically is you can get collateral damage. And then we learned 10 years later, oh gosh, that wasn't such a good idea, was it? So we're kind of a species that learns sometimes backwards. Next. Unintended consequences, collateral damage. Unethical MDs. I like to think that some high percentage of my colleagues have the best interests of patients in mind. Some of them don't, or have other agendas that compete strongly. And those folks contributed to the problem. Next. And again, social media, which is part of the internet, contributed to us getting here with this problem. Next slide. Okay, so what are the solutions? Here's a self-operating napkin from Rube Goldberg. Next. So complex solutions include, and go ahead and advance. Educating providers. We need another ethos change. This has been going on probably 2 years or so. We're like, okay, guys, you know all this stuff we told you like 10 years ago? Not right. Go the other way. I remember working at St. Vincent de Paul Clinic downtown, and I had a patient that I followed for 5 years. And in my first year, I told her to do one thing with her estrogen replacement based on the best scientific information. And then 5 years later, I had to say, you know that stuff I told you 5 years ago? That's wrong. Do the other thing. Now, thankfully, she didn't cross her eyes and say, get your act together. But our practices and understanding change as we see this thing play out, so we don't know all the time. Next. New drugs and delivery systems. They're trying to design addict-proof drugs. Boy, are they sneaky, though, right? I mean, you know, mousetrap mouse, that kind of a deal. Next. DEA regulations. The DEA and the FDA is trying to catch up now, right? And if anybody's noticed, it's a lot harder to prescribe Schedule II drugs now. You know, so now they've swung and they've tried to tamp the problem from some other areas. Next. And then again, we have improved treatments and understanding of the problem. Now again, this is in retrospect. We did this thing 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Doctors treat pain, treat pain, treat pain. Then we make a mess. And now we're trying to clean it up. That's kind of how I see the history of this problem these days. Next. This is from the New York Times article. Bear with me for a minute. This isn't in your slides. In 30 of the 31 states that provided their disciplinary rates, buprenorphine doctors are far more likely to have been sanctioned than other doctors. So what this statistic says, and you can see the article if you're interested, is doctors who have gotten in trouble for other things are often very likely to be buprenorphine prescribers. So across the country, shady doctors, doctors with questionable practices and ethics, prescribing buprenorphine have contributed to the problem. This is my people, this is my tribe, so I'm just putting out there, that's part of the problem. Next. Who misuses opiates?